Um, if you want to cure paralysis, Alzheimer's, and blindness in the year 2036, you don't actually need a sterile, multi-billion-dollar silicon laboratory. You just need, well, a pile of rotting coffee garbage from Costa Rica.
Yeah, it really does sound completely backwards.
Right. But welcome to today's deep dive, where we are unpacking a medical breakthrough that honestly sounds like pure science fiction, but is literally rooted in the dirt. We have an incredibly fascinating stack of sources in front of us today, specifically curated for you.
We do. We're looking at some heavy technical specifications, a 2036 medical projection document, and these really dense project overviews detailing a Costa Rican initiative called Novi Amazonia.
Then they're the ones behind this.
Exactly. They've developed this neural AI system called PRONL-Ling NK369, which features this digital core known as Galatea.
So the mission for our deep dive today is to explore how this specific technology aims to tackle historically incurable conditions. Things like Parkinson's, spinal cord injuries, severe strokes.
But the real shift in thinking is that they aren't relying on the synthetic, lab-grown materials the medical industry usually champions. I mean, they are engineering solutions using the discarded organic pruning waste of coffee plants from the global south.
Which is just a massive departure from the status quo. And to set the table here, the sources really emphasize the sheer scale of what Novi Amazonia is attempting.
Right. The scope is huge.
It's a 100% social nonprofit initiative. So the objective isn't to build, like, a new pharmaceutical monopoly. It's to transform the lives of up to 85 million people over the next decade.
All while simultaneously injecting economic value right back into the local farming communities that provide the raw materials.
Yeah, that structural model is essential to keep in mind as we look at the technology itself.
Definitely. Because to understand why a coffee plant is suddenly, the holy grail of neuroengineering, we first have to understand the massive, incredibly expensive wall that traditional neurotech has run into.
The synthetic stuff.
Right. For well over a decade, billions of dollars have just been poured into synthetic chemical graphene.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because graphene has been hyped up for years. I mean, we've all seen the headlines calling it a god material because of how perfectly it conducts electricity.
Oh, absolutely. The hype was everywhere.
But when you look at the actual clinical data in these sources,
Yeah.
putting synthetic graphene inside the human body has been, well, it's been a catastrophic failure.
It really has. And it essentially comes down to two very stubborn physical realities: chemistry and geometry.
Let's start with the chemistry.
So getting carbon atoms to form a perfect synthetic graphene sheet in a laboratory requires a highly violent industrial process. You are basically bathing raw carbon in highly toxic acids and harsh chemical solvents.
Just to peel the layers apart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the physical reality is, no matter how aggressively you wash or purify that material afterward, trace molecular signatures of those toxins remain embedded in the carbon.
Which is a huge problem. I mean, the human immune system is incredibly sensitive. It's obviously going to flag those toxic residues.
Right away.
But reading through the anatomical data here, the geometry problem seems infinitely worse. Current graphene is manufactured as a flat 2D sheet. It is rigidly structured and literally one atom thick.
Yeah, that's the fundamental design flaw.
We are taking that flat, rigid microscopic plane and trying to shove it into the human brain, which is a soft, wet, 3D organ that pulses and swells with every single heartbeat.
It's a complete mismatch.
Our sources use a pretty visceral comparison for this. It's essentially acting like microscopic razor blades.
I just have to ask, why did researchers ever think forcing human neurons to essentially swallow ground glass was a viable long-term strategy?
Well, that's the friction point between electrical engineering and biology. The engineers were just so focused on the electrical conductivity of a 2D sheet that they totally ignored the biomechanics.
So they just overlooked the physical damage. Basically, yeah. And that ground glass analogy perfectly describes the microscopic destruction. This triggers a biological cascade known as direct cytotoxicity, because the brain doesn't just sit passively while being sliced.
Right, it has its own defense mechanism.
Exactly. It has an active security force, microglial cells and macrophages that are constantly patrolling the tissue.
And when they come across a 2D synthetic sheet,
They detect the physical shearing of the local tissue, they detect the chemical signatures of those toxic acid residues we talked about, and they sound a massive inflammatory alarm.
so the body immediately goes to war.
Full-scale war. It treats the implant as a hostile invader and deploys specialized cells to build a dense, fibrotic wall of scar tissue completely around it.
The glial scar.
Precisely. The glial scar completely encapsulates the hardware. So within a matter of months, the implant is just suffocated.
It's basically trapped.
Yeah. It can't receive signals. It can't transmit electricity. It is permanently blinded and deafened. No matter how elegant the software is, human engineering fundamentally loses the war against the immune system every single time.
Which dictates that the solution isn't to fight the body with stronger materials. You actually have to trick it. You have to speak its native architectural language.
That's exactly it.
And that is the entry point for the visionary behind Novi Amazonia, a Costa Rican creator named Martin Gutierrez Guerrero. His team developed what they call 3D biogenic coffee graphene, or 3-biogog.
Right. And by utilizing the organic biomass of coffee pruning waste from Cartago, Costa Rica, they completely bypassed the need for industrial acids or toxic chemical solvents.
So eliminating the toxic chemistry is a significant hurdle cleared. But the true quantum leap in this research is how they circumvent the ground glass geometry problem you mentioned.
Yeah, they aren't trying to force a 2D sheet into a 3D environment anymore. They've engineered a highly porous three-dimensional network out of the carbon.
I have a hard time wrapping my head around this specific mechanism, though. The sources mention they use quantum computing to map the brain's extracellular matrix.
Right, the natural scaffolding.
Yeah, so they essentially generate a flawless digital blueprint of the microscopic scaffolding that naturally holds human brain cells together. Then they put the coffee waste through a process called controlled pyrolysis.
Correct.
But here's where it gets really interesting because, wait, we're talking about burning plant waste in an oven. How can an algorithm possibly have quantum-level control over something as chaotic as a fire? Doesn't the burning process just destroy whatever geometry you were trying to create?
Well, you'd think so if it were, a traditional fire. But controlled pyrolysis is a completely different mechanism. They aren't just tossing coffee branches into a furnace.
Okay, so what is it?
They're placing the biomass into a vacuum-sealed chamber where oxygen is entirely removed. That completely prevents actual combustion.
Oh, wow, so it doesn't burn.
Exactly. Then, guided by those quantum algorithms, they apply highly specific, localized electromagnetic fields and microscopic temperature gradients.
So the AI is managing the heat.
Yeah, the algorithm is constantly adjusting the thermal load, literally microsecond by microsecond, forcing the carbon atoms to crystallize and bond in a very specific pattern as the plant material breaks down.
So they are essentially dictating how the carbon reorganizes itself as it cooks.
Exactly that. They are physically tuning the carbon to permanently lock into the exact fractal geometry of the human brain's natural extracellular matrix. The angles, the pore sizes, the distances between the carbon struts, it's a flawless biomimetic mirror.
And the immune system actually falls for it. When those macrophage security guards show up to inspect the implant, there are no sharp edges slicing the tissue. There are no heavy metals.
Right. They just feel a hollow, porous carbon structure that perfectly mimics their own biological neighborhood.
In immunology, this relies on structural homology. Because the physical architecture matches what the macrophages expect to find in healthy tissue, the inflammatory cascade is just never triggered.
Never triggered at all. But it goes deeper than simply avoiding rejection. Because the geometry is so native to the brain, the tissue actively integrates with it.
Right, it grows into it.
Exactly. Through a process called angiogenesis, the brain literally invites new blood vessels and neurons to grow into the pores of the coffee graphene. It high-speeds the technology.
Okay, so the biology accepts the physical material as friendly tissue. It treats it like an empty apartment building and moves in. But an empty carbon sponge doesn't compute data.
No, it doesn't.
It can't actively fix a broken biological circuit. So how do we get an injured brain to actually transmit signals across this material? There has to be a processor driving this, right?
Yeah, that transition from passive material to active medical device requires a digital engine, and that is Galatea.
The AI core.
Right. Galatea is the hybrid neurocomputational AI core integrated directly into this biogenic scaffold. According to the technical specs, Galatea operates with an ultra-low latency of less than 0.01 milliseconds.
That is insane. Just to put that in perspective for you, human reflexes like pulling your hand away from a hot stove take about 15 to 20 milliseconds. So this AI is processing neural data orders of magnitude faster than the body's natural nervous system.
And that speed is absolutely critical when you look at their first major application, Severe spinal cord injuries.
Right, because of the physical disconnect.
Yeah, a severed spinal cord is a logistical nightmare. It's very much like a cut transatlantic fiber optic cable. The brain up top is still firing perfect commands, and the leg muscles down below are perfectly healthy and waiting for those commands.
But the signal just dreams.
Exactly. The electricity cannot bridge the physical gap of the lesion.
So a surgeon implants this coffee graphene directly into the gap of the spinal cord. But wait, if you drop a highly conductive carbon bridge into a biological environment, how does the electricity not just leak out and, fry the surrounding tissue?
This is where a principle called conductivity matching becomes the hero. Traditional electrodes use metals like copper, platinum, or silicon,
Right.
but the electrical resistance of those metals is fundamentally different from biological tissue, which is primarily just water, salt, and fat. When you push electricity between two mismatched mediums, the resistance generates heat and signal loss.
It essentially cooks the tissue.
It literally cooks the surrounding cells over time. But the atomic structure of this coffee graphene possesses the exact same electrical resistance profile as biological water and salt.
Which means the electrical signal flows natively without any friction or heat generation.
None at all.
And because of that 3D porous structure we talked about earlier, the surviving motor neurons on both sides of the spinal break physically drag their axons into the carbon matrix.
Yeah, they grow through the sponge until they touch and organically reconnect, while Galatea manages the signal routing in the meantime.
It creates a completely seamless hybrid circuit.
It really does.
Now, bridging a clean physical gap, like a severed spine, makes intuitive sense. But what about Alzheimer's disease? Because the pathology there is entirely different. You aren't dealing with a clean cut.
No, it's a degenerative process.
I love the analogy the project documents use for this. They ask us to picture the hippocampus, which handles memory formation, as a busy, high-speed highway.
A highway of continuous electrical traffic.
Right. And in a brain suffering from Alzheimer's, toxic proteins called amyloid plaques begin to accumulate. It's like a massive landslide suddenly dropping onto the middle of the highway.
That's a great way to visualize it.
An electrical signal, a specific memory travels down the synapse, hits that amyloid plaque landslide, the traffic dead ends, the neuron dies, and the memory is permanently lost. In this scenario, Galatea doesn't clear the landslide. It acts as an invisible suspension bridge.
And the mechanics of that bypass are remarkable. The AI microchips embedded in the graphene detect the specific electrical signature of a memory signal right as it approaches the plaque blockade.
It sees it coming.
Exactly. It intercepts that data, routes the electrical current through the physical carbon scaffold, completely bypassing the diseased tissue, and drops the signal safely on the healthy synapse on the other side of the blockade.
It's basically a cardiac bypass surgery, but for human thoughts. You are routing traffic around the destroyed infrastructure.
But this raises an important question about adaptability. Bypassing a static roadblock like a plaque is a relatively straightforward routing problem. The real test of this technology is how it handles neurodegenerative diseases where the brain isn't just blocked, but actively misfiring and destroying its own foundation.
You're talking about Parkinson's disease.
Right. To address conditions like Parkinson's, Galatea relies on what the developers call the symphonic integration protocol.
How does that work?
Well, most current neurotech tries to overpower the brain, forcing a rigid binary rhythm onto the tissue to stop tremors. Galatea operates more like a highly observant orchestra conductor. It listens and harmonizes with the natural firing frequencies of the patient's remaining neurons.
Across those 4 dynamic phases they mentioned: interception, synchronization, algorithmic modulation, and permanent symbiosis.
Exactly.
Let's ground this in the real world for a second. If you've ever watched a family member struggle with Parkinson's, you know that current surgical treatments, like deep brain stimulation, are incredibly brutal.
They really are.
Surgeons drill into the skull and implant rigid metal electrodes to constantly shock the brain and suppress the tremors. But again, you have rigid metal in a soft brain. Every time the patient turns their head, that metal causes microfriction.
Plus, the impedance is so high they have to use inefficient voltages that slowly degrade the surrounding tissue over time.
But the biogenic scaffold avoids all of that trauma because it is soft, flexible, and moves natively with the tissue. It suppresses the tremor using a fraction of the voltage.
Right. But suppressing a tremor is really just managing a symptom. The underlying tragedy of Parkinson's is that the cells producing dopamine are actively dying off.
So how does this fix that?
This is where the biological nature of the coffee graphene changes the game. Because it is a porous 3D sponge, it isn't just an electrical conduit, it can actually be preloaded with neurotrophic factors before the surgeon implants it.
Neurotrophic factors.
Okay,
Wait, so we're basically talking about highly specific biological fertilizer.
exactly. The graphene matrix slowly and deliberately releases this biochemical fertilizer into the immediate area. So on one front, the AI is delivering electrical pulses to stop the tremor.
And on the other front.
On the biological front, the scaffold is chemically waking up dormant neural stem cells, stimulating them to divide and grow brand new dopamine-producing neurons. It attacks the symptom electrically while rebuilding the biological foundation chemically.
So what does this all mean when we look at something radically different like multiple sclerosis? In MS, the body's immune system mistakenly attacks and destroys myelin, which is the protective insulation wrapped around our nerve fibers.
Right, the demyelination.
It's like rats chewing the rubber insulation off the wires in your house until everything shorts out and sparks. How does a coffee plant fix a demyelinated nerve?
For MS, the technology utilizes a mechanism called guided electrical chemotaxis. The Galatea core is programmed to emit highly specific radio and ultrasonic micropulses,
Okay.
and they're precisely tuned to 14.7 gigahertz, radiating out into the damaged zone.
Wait, I need to stop you there. How does a 14.7 gigahertz radio wave physically talk to a biological cell? We aren't injecting artificial plastic myelin to patch the nerve, right?
Yeah, no plastic.
Are you saying the radio wave is somehow giving biological orders?
The data points to cellular resonance. Biological cells, specifically the oligodendrocytes responsible for maintaining myelin, have specific ion channels in their cell membranes.
And the frequency affects them.
Exactly. The 14.7 gigahertz frequency isn't arbitrary. It physically resonates with those specific membrane proteins. It's like a foreman blowing a very specific dog whistle that only the sleeping electricians can hear.
Wow.
The physical vibration of that frequency triggers a genetic cascade inside the lazy, overwhelmed oligodendrocytes, ordering them to wake up, migrate to the damaged nerve, and begin secreting new natural myelin.
That is literal biological reprogramming at the hardware level. The implant isn't providing the replacement parts, it's providing the exact resonant frequency that forces the body to execute its own dormant repair code.
And that exact philosophy of utilizing residual biological intention applies to their projections for ALS as well.
Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis.
Right. In ALS, the motor neurons slowly die off, trapping a cognitively intact patient inside a failing body until they eventually lose the ability to control their diaphragm and breathe.
So what's the 2036 projection for that?
It involves placing bioelectric patches of this graphene on the phrenic nerve pathways. It acts as an incredibly complex, localized pacemaker.
So it basically listens for the brain's faint, dying electrical intention to take a breath, intercepts it, amplifies it through the carbon without signal loss, and mechanically forces the diaphragm to contract.
Exactly. It buys patients years of autonomous breathing without being tied to a mechanical ventilator.
What's fascinating here is that once you establish a platform that fluently speaks the native electrical dialect of the nervous system and can command local cells to rebuild without triggering an immune response, the medical applications just scale exponentially.
They really do.
Let's look at the scaling applications for vision. For patients with cortical blindness or severe macular degeneration, the sources outline using the innate photoelectric properties of this coffee graphene to engineer artificial bioretinas.
Right. We're essentially talking about placing microscopic solar panels inside the human eye.
Which is incredible. But what's the bottleneck with current technology?
The bottleneck with current silicon-based retinal implants goes right back to that electrical resistance issue. The resistance between rigid metal and the soft organic tissue of the optic nerve is so severe that almost all the complex visual data is just lost in translation.
Right.
Patients with silicon retinas end up seeing crude, pixelated black and white flashes of light. But because the biogenic graphene has zero electrical resistance with the body, there is virtually zero data loss.
The optic nerve receives a pure, frictionless data stream. The AI can translate complex photons into high-fidelity electrical signals that convey sharp edges, fluid motion, and even specific wavelengths.
Meaning the brain could eventually process color again.
And if we look at severe stroke recovery, the application is just as profound. When a patient suffers a stroke, there is a central core of dead brain tissue. But surrounding that core is a region called the penumbra.
The tissue that is heavily damaged, starved of oxygen, and struggling to survive.
Right, so by strategically placing these graphene patches directly onto the penumbra, the Galatea implant generates a specific electromagnetic gradient.
It acts like a rescue beacon in a storm.
A literal electromagnetic rescue beacon. That specific gradient physically attracts the brain's own roaming stem cells, pulling them toward the disaster zone.
And because of the 3D geometry of the patch we discussed earlier, the physical structure actually dictates how those stem cells differentiate.
It tells them what to become.
Yes, it tells them whether they need to become a neuron or a supporting glial cell to save the dying tissue.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the demographic models Novi Amazonia has published are honestly historic. By initially targeting paralysis, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's, they estimate reaching about 50 million people.
Which is already staggering.
But when you layer in the scalable applications for ALS breathing pacemakers, MS remyelination, biretinas, and stroke rescue beacons, their 10-year projection jumps to over 85 million people worldwide.
Yeah.
That is the equivalent of pulling the entire population of Germany out of hospital beds and wheelchairs in a single technological stroke.
It completely redefines global public health infrastructure.
But, I have to play devil's advocate for a second. You mentioned earlier that this is a nonprofit initiative. If this technology actually works and threatens to completely disrupt the multi-billion-dollar symptom management industry, how does a Costa Rican agricultural initiative protect itself from being buried or bought out by traditional pharmaceutical monopolies?
Well, that's the genius of their supply chain. You can monopolize a highly complex synthetic chemical manufactured in a billion-dollar clean room. You cannot monopolize coffee pruning waste.
Because it's everywhere.
It is an abundant, decentralized agricultural byproduct found all over the global south. By utilizing open-source algorithmic manufacturing and relying on a waste product that farmers usually have to pay to get rid of, Nova Amazonia is building a decentralized production model.
Making it incredibly difficult for traditional corporate entities to choke off.
Exactly.
Which brings a beautiful duality to this entire project.
Right.
It is actively healing human neurological suffering, but it is simultaneously healing the local environment.
Yeah, they are taking rotting agricultural waste, which would normally decompose and emit thousands of tons of greenhouse gases, and physically transmuting it into the highest value medical resource on Earth.
And the wealth generated from that resource cycles directly back to the local farming communities.
It's a complete inversion of how we typically view high-tech medicine. Our default instinct is to always try and conquer human biology with titanium, heavy metals, and sterile plastics.
Right.
But in this case, the ultimate cure for our most complex diseases was quietly hiding in the cellular geometry of a discarded plant stem.
It truly is a crushing lesson in scientific humility. We spent billions of dollars building the most advanced quantum computers in human history, only to use them to realize that millions of years of natural evolution had already perfected the exact molecular scaffolding we needed to heal the brain.
And that reality really brings this entire deep dive right to our kitchen tables.
Tomorrow morning, when you pour yourself a cup of coffee, I want you to take a second and look at it differently. Don't just see your daily caffeine fix. You are looking at the foundational organic material that is actively being used to rebuild the minds and bodies of tens of millions of people.
It's a profound shift away from the arrogance of synthetic lab engineering.
And a shift toward a deep respect for the quiet perfection of nature.
This raises an important question, and it's honestly a thought I want to leave you with today. If the exact geometric cure for spinal paralysis, Alzheimer's memory loss, and blindness was hiding inside the ignored, discarded pruning waste of a simple Costa Rican coffee plant, what other miracle cures for our greatest global crises are, right at this very second, being burned, crushed, or thrown away as useless agricultural garbage around the world? I mean, what else is just waiting for us to look at nature with a little more humility?
That is a very powerful question to sit with. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning the world around you, and we'll catch you next time.